Okay, you guys, I'm really excited about the story and the legend that I have for you today. I know I say that about almost every legend, but this one's different because this legend gets into my personal heritage. But before we get started, remember to hit that subscribe button. So there are three sisters of the South. We have New Orleans, Louisiana, Charleston, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia. New Orleans is considered the wicked sister, Charleston is considered the beautiful sister, and Savannah is considered the dirty or sometimes called ugly sister. But did you know that even though New Orleans has the title the wicked sister of the South, that both Charleston and Savannah and the surrounding areas also have about as much voodoo and hoodoo as New Orleans does? The only difference is, in my opinion, that Charleston and Savannah have kept it a little bit more hidden. That is until the book came out, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, which took place in Savannah and exposed some of this side of Charleston and Savannah. Now, even though Charleston is in South Carolina and Savannah is Georgia in two separate states, they are a part of the same cultural area, which is called the Low Country. My mom's family, my maternal side of the family, is from the South Carolina Low Country. In fact, I'm going to admit something to you guys. Even though I'm running a channel about Georgia and Atlanta, I'm not actually a native to Georgia. I was born in South Carolina. In fact, my first name, Brice, is my mother's maiden name. And the Brice family is a huge family in South Carolina. In fact, the University of South Carolina's football stadium is the Williams-Brice Stadium. Some great uncle of mine gave the money to build the stadium. I'm not really into football, and I definitely didn't want to be a Gamecock, so that is not where I went to school. And it might have been kind of awkward to be a girl named Brice who went to a school that had the Williams-Brice Stadium. The Brices have a long line in South Carolina of doctors and of, from what I understand, rice plantations. Now, rice plantations were really big along the Low Country of South Carolina and Georgia because the Low Country was called the Low Country because of the way the ground sunk down on the coast, which made it perfect for farming rice. Now, my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother, was a Strom. Her name was Maxine Strom. And the Stroms are another really big family in South Carolina. In fact, my grandmother's cousin was the late Strom Thurmond. Again, what is common in the South is we give maiden names to kids as their first or middle name, and anyway. And for those who don't know, Strom Thurmond, I think, still holds the title as our longest running U.S. Senator. I know that when my parents got married, he sent my mom a bunch of really nice books as a wedding present, and I colored in them as a child. So, oops. But anyway, that's my mom's family. Now, we ended up in Georgia because my grandfather, his name was Boyce Brice, Dr. Boyce Brice, was a doctor, and he moved his kids to Atlanta first and then was, I guess, headhunted to the Harbin Clinic outside of Atlanta to be a surgeon for the Harbin Clinic. My mom's parents are buried in Georgia, but it was always very clear to us growing up that we were South Carolinian, and not only were we from South Carolina, but we were Low Country proud. My mom herself was born in Charleston. It's like the Mecca of the Low Country. And so after my parents got married, they went to the University of Georgia and got married soon after they finished up school. They moved back to South Carolina, and that's where I was born. And it wasn't until my father decided to go to veterinary school back at the University of Georgia that we moved back to the state. After he finished up at school, he moved us back to the town where the Harbin Clinic is located to open up a veterinarian clinic. And that's how I ended up back here in Georgia. So in fairness, I guess it was kind of like growing up. I had maybe two homes. It was Georgia where I was growing up, and then we would spend our summers back in South Carolina on the coast, back in the low country. And that was always a really special time for me as a child. Now, granted, we always went to Litchfield, South Carolina, which is near Pawleys Island, another very haunted island. And it is a small beach community, but it was always really fun for me to be in this big house with all of my cousins and to kind of get used to that folklore and to hear all the stories, especially the Gullah stories, which is going to play a huge part in the story that I have to tell. So all along the coast of the Low Country, from South Carolina all the way through the barrier islands of Georgia, we have what we call the Gullah people. The Gullah people are people from Africa. They're African Americans, and they were brought over, or their ancestors were brought over through the slave trade. Now, Charleston was a really big port. Savannah is close to the coast, but it's more of a river city. It's tucked back a little bit. But they would take the slaves in through Charleston, and of course they would get sold and brought to work on these different rice and cotton plantations. The Gullah people first were brought to the United States as early as the 1500s, when America as we know it was being discovered and they were trying to create civilizations. Now, when the Africans were captured in Africa, for the Gullah people specifically, they were all brought and kept in captivity for a while off the coast of West Africa. And it is believed that here, at this point in Africa, is where the Gullah culture really originated. It was kind of a melting pot of all these different tribes coming together in Africa before they were brought over to the New World. Now, of course, you've got different elements of voodoo in the Gullah culture, and then once they got to the United States, you start to mix in a little bit of herbalism into their faith, as well as a little hints of Christianity. So the Gullah faith and culture is one that is definitely a merging of different worlds. The Gullah people, or sometimes referred to as the Geechee people, are very superstitious. And as I said earlier, even though New Orleans has made a market off of its voodoo and its hoodoo, these same practices are very prevalent within the Gullah communities of the Low Country. I mean, again, let's look at Midnight and the Garden of Good and Evil. If you haven't read that book or seen the movie and you want to know more about or see for yourself more of this culture, I would definitely recommend reading the book or seeing the movie. I always think the book is better, but that's just my opinion. But what you see in Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil is very, very realistic to the way the Low Country culture still is today. It is said that the Gullah people are the oldest living traditional community left. They even still speak their own language that is a combination of English and some African languages. And personally, for me, I have a really hard time understanding when I'm in South Carolina. I think some of my family members do a better job understanding Gullah people. I just didn't really grow up except for the summer times around this culture. But whenever I would go back to South Carolina, it always really fascinated me that these communities still existed. And I will tell you, there was a point when I was maybe in high school or middle school where I believe it was Nickelodeon, I'm not 100% sure, but one of the kids' station did a show called Gullah Gullah Island, which put a spotlight on this fantastic community that is still around today. Now again, you have to remember the Low Country is a bunch of barrier islands. And in fact, the Gullah people are known for their sweetgrass baskets, which I have one right here. We have a lot of sweetgrass baskets that we've gotten over the years, and when you're driving through the Low Country, you'll just see stands of people making these baskets. And from what I understand, it's still an oral tradition. You can't like buy a book on how to make a sweetgrass basket. It is strictly learned through your family and through your heritage, which is really, really cool. And if you're in South Carolina or if you're in Georgia, go buy some baskets, go help support this community. I know that the government is trying to do certain things and put regulations on to try to keep this community in existence, but if you're like me, you're always a little skeptical of the government anyway, so I really would suggest that if you are in the Low Country, please go and buy some baskets and support these people. Now, the thing about the Low Country is there is an element to it that is very spooky. It's incredibly hot, as it is in inland Georgia as well. It's just hot, and there's a lot of bugs, and you see a lot of the trees with the moss that weep down that give it a very eerie feeling. And of course, this part of the United States, as far as the Europeans, is one of the older parts of our country. It's where a lot of settlements began. And so with that came a lot of sickness and death and battles and fighting. And so you have a lot of hauntings. Now, the Gullah people became a prized people back before slavery was abolished. Apparently, they were the strongest and the best equipped to work the rice and the cotton plantations. But of course, slavery for the United States is a very dark part of our heritage. And because of the way that a lot of slaves were treated and the fact that people were sold like livestock, there's going to be a lot of toxic and darkness energy still here in the Low Country. The practice of voodoo, of trying to use herbs to cast spells of either revenge or protection, became a really strong practice here in the Low Country. And it's a practice that's still around today. In fact, I found a police report from 2014 from Beaufort, South Carolina, which is very close to Savannah and Hilton Head. And it was a report done by an 85-year-old woman that said that her neighbor put a curse on her, causing her and her family to continually fall out of their chairs. Now, of course, with any faith like this, you have witch doctors, or as they're also called, root doctors. And they're called root doctors because part of this faith is using roots to either combat a evil force or use as protection or to cast spells. So a lot of times these witch doctors also take them on the name of Buzzard, Dr. Buzzard. And the last big witch doctor that we had was a guy named Stephen Robinson, and he was from St. Helena, South Carolina, and he died in 1947, but his grave is still a famous place for people to visit. In fact, there's always handfuls of dirt missing from his grave because people believe if they take some of that dirt, it will give them supernatural powers, or at the very least, perhaps protect them from some supernatural powers that maybe aren't so good. And I gonna admit, if I ever go to his grave, I would probably take some dirt too. Better safe than sorry, right? Because I'm superstitious, I believe in this stuff. So our story today actually takes place in Bullock County, Georgia. Now, Bullock County is about 50 miles away from Savannah and about 214 miles from Atlanta. Bullock is in the Low Country, very much in the Low Country. And so you're going to see a lot of this culture in the story that I am going to tell. Now, Bullock County was named after a guy named Archibald Bullock, What a name. Can we bring that name back? That is amazing, Archibald. Anyway, Archibald went on to be our first governor here in Georgia after we won our independence from the Brits. And I think I'm just gonna call him Archibald instead of Bullock, even though his last name was Bullock, and usually we go by people's last names, and the county is Bullock County, but Archibald is just so much better. So Archibald, like my mother, was born in Charleston, South Carolina. He was a planter, and he ended up moving to Georgia, and he bought a plantation on the Savannah River. So Archibald himself is like real deal low country boy, and he also was really against the British, was huge supporter for our independence. And the funny thing is during the American Revolution, the state of Georgia was a loyalist state, which meant that the state of Georgia did not want us to be separated from Mother England. In my opinion, I'm really freaking glad we are not a part of Mother England anymore. No offense to my English friends, I have a lot of English heritage myself, but I really believe in independence, and I really don't think that a monarchy is necessary. So we're going to fast forward from Archibald and the American Revolution, and we're going to go all the way to 1895. So in 1895, there was this girl named Florence Mincey. She was 13 years old and living in Bullock County, Georgia. All of a sudden, Florence started breaking out in these fits of rage. She would just lunge after people that were around her. She was like rabid. It was crazy. And so her family had to chain her up in her house. Man, it is always the teenage girls that have these issues. I mean, think about it. If there's any poltergeist or any weird stuff going around, you guarantee there's a teenage girl somewhere involved in that story. I guess Florence Mincey is no different, and 1895 is no different. Now, Florence's behavior was so peculiar and so scary that the Bullock Times, the newspaper, released an article about her having to be chained up in her house on October 10th of 1895. During this time, Florence would refuse food. She didn't want anything that would normally sustain human life. And when it would come times where she would calm down and she seemed to be getting back to normal, her parents would take her chains off. And as soon as they did that, she would like run out of the house, always in the same direction, like speed lightning, in that huge petticoat, in that dress, like girl was on a mission. But she would always get to a certain point and she would collapse. So over time, this family has this like rabid 13-year-old girl who's lunging at people like a wild animal and running off and like hitting a wall and collapsing in an invisible wall and collapsing in the same spot. The family decided it was time to do what any respectable Southern family would do in this situation. They called the local witch doctor. I mean, legitimately, I would probably do the same thing. Even in 2020, I've lived around here long enough to know that there are just some things that can't be explained. Now, as soon as the witch doctor came over and the family explained to him what was going on, he suspected that there was something about the area or the place where Florence was falling. He also recognized immediately that Florence had been cursed and she was behaving as a bewitched, in 2020 terms, zombie. So the witch doctor, Dr. Roots, Dr. Buzzard, told the family to go to the place where Florence would collapse and to dig it up. Well, they got about 2 feet into the ground where they found a wad of hair. I couldn't find whose hair it was. I would imagine that it was probably her own hair, but I'm not 100% certain on that. Once they found the hair, the witch doctor told the family, the Mincey family, to burn the hair. And as soon as they burned the hair, the spell was broken and Florence came back to normal, or as normal as a hormonal 13-year-old can be. Now, when I tried to find more information on Florence Mincey, there was not a lot of stuff available. And in fact, I have to thank Jim Miles of the book Erie, Georgia for even cluing me in that this story existed. Unfortunately, or fortunately, there are a lot of stories similar to Florence's story in this part of the Low Country. So I have a feeling her story got a little bit wrapped up with other people's story. Now, I don't believe that her story is an urban legend because we have a name and we have a newspaper article about this event, kind of like our werewolf of Georgia, Emily Isabella Burt. We know that this person was alive, and we do know that something very peculiar happened to her. Now, I'm less inclined to believe that Emmy was a werewolf, but I'm more inclined to believe that perhaps Florence Mincey was bewitched or cursed. Perhaps that's because this is a culture I'm familiar with and a culture that I've learned about and that is part of my own heritage, that I'm more inclined to believe that is what happened. Now, again, as I said earlier, these types of stories often revolve around teenage hormonal girls. Could that have been the problem? Maybe. I don't know. But I do know that I am so glad that we got some witch doctors out there, because, again, there are things in life that we just can't explain. All right, guys, thank you so much again for sitting through another story. What do you think? Are you from the Low Country? Have you been to Savannah or Charleston? Have you experienced some of the phenomenon? In a later video, I might do some more Low Country stories that I know that I was told as a child. We'll just see. We'll see how this channel goes. But tell me your stories. And again, if you are going to the Low Country, if you're going to the beach down there or on vacation as soon as we're all out of quarantine, then please, 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 please go support the Gullah communities. I take a lot of pride that these communities are a part of my heritage too. Even though I'm white, I feel very protective of the Gullah and the Geechee people, and I really encourage you guys all to go and enjoy that culture. Anyway, special thanks to Josh McKay, as always, for writing and singing and performing our music for this channel. And thank you to Todd Roderick, as always, for helping me edit. Again, don't forget to subscribe. If you hit the bell, you will definitely be notified anytime a new video is released. I'm really trying to do about 5 videos a week for now, and as time goes on, we'll see if I can do more a week or less a week, depending on what the demands are, but that we'll only know as far as people subscribe. So have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys later. Bye.